Actually recording. Great. Again, my name is Marcel Urayeneza, Leadership Programs Manager on our GFN team. It's good to see familiar faces. It seems like the people coming back from even the previous session we had today, and it's always good to see you. I'm here with my colleagues, Xiomara Enriquez, program officer on our team. I'm here with Paige Turner, also on our team. You are all familiar with us. But today, I want to shortly introduce or bring up Nikki to continue or to lead the conversation today. But today is really another session of conversations that we are partnering with one of our great partners in the field of leadership or leadership training. Our goal as a foundation, as you know, is to provide an opportunity to you to connect, collaborate, and act collectively. In this conversation today, which is around collective leadership, is very timely and very important. So I hope today's conversation is going to be a great conversation. And this is the second in the 5 series coffee chats that are going to be led by leadership learning community. And in 1 second or a few seconds, I'm going to invite Nikki then, who is co-executive director with Erica, to introduce the LLC team and to set the conversation going, and also to take it from here. So I just want to welcome everybody and make sure that you use the chat so you can make sure you can communicate with each other just like we always do. I welcome Nikki to take it from here.
Hi, thank you so much, Marcel. Good to see everyone and good to see some familiar faces from last week. I wanted to also thank the interpreters for bringing language access and justice into the space. As a reminder, language justice emphasizes an individual's right to communicate in the language they feel most comfortable and articulate in. And just imagine if all our communities had language justice in our spaces, what that would feel like. So thank you, Kellogg, the Global Fellows Network, and for our interpreters for practicing language justice here. We also want to start by doing a land acknowledgement. This practice recognizes that many of us are on land tended by Indigenous communities in the past and currently. We use nativeland.ca to find information about the land we're on, and I want to invite you to, if you do know what the land that you're on, to put it in the chat. I'm currently in Ohlone land, unceded Ohlone land. That's Oakland, California. If you know where your land is, please put it in the chat. We'd love to see where you're from. And we want to recognize that the practice of land acknowledgement invites solidarity with Indigenous sovereignty movements. And at the same time, we also recognize that colonialism, climate change, and war has displaced and created mass migration throughout the world. Thank you, thank you. Good to see where you all are coming from. Keep it flowing in, and as you are flowing it in, I'm just gonna move us on to the next slide. And I'm gonna share a little bit about leadership learning community. This is a slide that talks about our journey towards collective liberation. You can go back to the other slide, Erica. Leadership Learning Community is a national organization. As Marcel mentioned, we are learners. We hold space for research, study, learning, and practice of leadership programs. In particular, we host liberatory leadership spaces. And this is our journey towards collective liberation. And this is one journey. There's many different ways about this, but what we do want to remind you is there's a lot of work around equity and justice within our system. In our spaces, we also want to invite you to hold space outside of our systems. That is to acknowledge your existence is also for beauty, love, joy, song, music, art. And that's the type of space that we'd like to hold for you in this coffee chat today, that it can recognize that we are working towards making systems and structures better, but also recognize that you are more than that. And our collective leadership is actually about seeing that potential and beauty in us too. I'm going to move us on to our group agreements, which will come. Oh, here we go. Our conscious relationship agreements. We're offering 6 here, and I hope you can read it. Let me see. I can also put in the chat and give you a chance to read it. And as you're reading it, we would like to invite you to pick one that you would like to pay attention to today. And once you pick that one that you'd like to pay attention to, will you put it in the chat? And that way, we can hold each other accountable to practicing. I'll put the 6th one in right now. 5 and 6 got jumbled together a bit. I hope you got to see it in there. Thank you, Beth. Remember gratitude and experience joy together. Number 6, thank you. Right. Boris, trust your intention and own your impact. Hi, Deborah. Practice being a witness to the transformation of others and yourself during the course of our time together. Wonderful. Thank you all. And as you continue to do that and pay attention and maybe like get grounded, get comfortable in your seats, take a breath if you'd like to. I'm going to move us on to our agenda for today and walk you through what we have in store for you. Today's conversation is around collective leadership. We're going to start with, as you have already experienced, interpretation guidelines. So thank you for choosing your language. Thank you for being here in a multilingual space. We're doing some welcomes right now and giving you an overview. Next, Erica and I will share a little bit of our learnings about collective leadership. We've been in conversation with many leaders throughout the world about collective leadership and what it means to them in these times. We'd like to share some framing for you so we can have a discussion together. And so after we frame up what collective leadership has been for us, we will invite you into breakout room discussions. It'll be about 3 to 4 folks to a group, the first session, and then we'll go back to a group share out. And then we'll give you a chance to deepen your discussion with the same people in another breakout session. And then we'll close. How does that sound? I'm going to invite you to go thumbs up. Thank you. I see some thumbs up. I also invite you to unmute and say, hey, I would like one more thing added to the agenda, or I would love to see another topic or something to be touched on during the course of our time together. And as Erica always says to us, we invite rebellion in how we facilitate. And so if there are ways that we can get you to feel a little rebellious, I really encourage it. You can DM us on the chat, you can unmute and talk, or you can just simply, when time arises, jump out of your breakout space and come over and talk to us too. Okay. So anybody feeling rebellious today? Anybody want to add something to the agenda or have a question about it? Y'all have any questions?
Rebellious, but I'm still very intrigued by the term you used earlier, language justice. And so I will not derail the conversation, but I will be multitasking over here, looking that up and learning more about it.
Oh, absolutely, right? The idea that we can hold space in multiple language and not just force a dominant language in the space is a beautiful thing. And I hope you do have a chance to research a little bit about it. If helpful for the next session, I'm trying to get you to the next one. I'll give you more resources on that. All right, let's get into collective leadership. And I'm so grateful for this time. Like last week was a lot of fun for us. For folks who did come, I hope it was fun for you. This is, like sacred space to pull out of your busy days, to have a study on a topic, right? And collective leadership is, I think, a really interesting one to talk about. I'm going to quote Xiomara from the Global Leadership Forum in 2023 in South Africa last year, where she shared, simply put, leadership is about bringing people together. None of us can do it alone, right? And LLC agrees. Leading together is a viable strategy and an essential practice. And for those of you that were in our multi-generational workforce meeting last week, we affirmed that there are more people in this workforce than ever. Like each generation brings their own gifts to the table, and we have to start recognizing that we need all of our inputs in order to make this work. And as individuals and organizations, we are not all on the same path. We honor the multiple strategies and paths necessary to create change. And we can create spaces like this to connect and learn about each other's journeys, hopefully walk some parts of our journey together, and even support each other deeply along the way. And in those times when we find that we are on the same path or ready for some companionship, we must be willing and ready to intertwine, deepen connections, and practice interdependence. I'm going to pass it over to Erica to give you a few more concrete strategies. And I'm also putting in the chat the same slide deck that we used last week. We updated it to include, some of the talking points that we have for today and some of the resources we have on collective leadership. For those of you that were at the conversation last week, we also put some of your strategies on multi-generational workforces at the bottom of this slide deck. And we'll keep using this and building it as a bundle of information from all the coffee chats that we host with the Global Fellows Network. So Erica, passing on to you.
Hi there. Collective leadership has been part of LLC's DNA for a long time. So I'm excited to see LLC's founder, my former co-ED, on the call. That's exciting. At LLC, we've long said that our leadership goals are really to be eco-centric, not egocentric, which means to us that we focus on our ecosystem and the impact we have there, not on our individual or our organizational ego. Liberatory leadership, which to us is an ecocentric approach, is a particular area of interest for LLC. And so I'll give a definition that, is in part inspired by the National Equity Project. So for us, we say that if leadership is taking responsibility for what matters to you, as the National Equity Project says, that for us, liberatory leadership is collaboratively taking responsibility for collective freedom. In this case, leadership, as with simply the idea of taking responsibility, leadership doesn't have to be an individual or solo activity. When we talk about distributed leadership, people often suspect that shared leadership models, while theoretically nice, don't actually function. But for us at LLC, we found that collective leadership approaches have really allowed us and others to more fully use all and not just some of the capacities and gifts available to us, while also honoring our collective efforts towards systems change and transformation. Someone in the chat said something along the lines that no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And with collective leadership, we are collecting all of the somethings that we can do. Now, collective leadership isn't one thing. It's a very diverse kind of like an umbrella term, and it can be layered onto many different leadership formations, including individual kind of leadership structures, shared leadership, co-executive models, other distributed leadership models, fully flat organizations or entities, and networked approaches to leadership. At GFN, I know that you all are leaning into a networked approach to leadership. At LLC, we practice a shared leadership model, called the co-executive model. But even organizations with other hierarchical leadership models can make room to collaborate and share power more. So what we're going to do today and the time that we have is to just open the conversation. Nikki mentioned that there's a list of resources in the slide deck if you want to go deeper. And so I'm going to share with you some of the things that have worked for us at LLC. There's lots of tools and practices that we've used to support us. And we're going to kick off this conversation by sharing 4 practices that for us facilitate power sharing. Sorry, I've got a message to confirm my speaking language, so just going to fix that. So as I was saying, we're going to share 4 practices that for us at LLC facilitate sharing power and collective leadership. So 1 is that collective leadership requires an institutional commitment to collective leadership. So the board or the governance body, the staff, leadership have to be invested in this model of sharing power, talking about it and doing it. So this has to be reflected on, proactively worked on at the institution, and really embedded in the organizational strategy. Collaboration and sharing of power is not usually the norm in LLC's ecosystem, but things may be different in yours. So for us, a concrete practice is really allocating time and resources on the topic of sharing power, interdependence, collaboration, and collective leadership. Another practice that's important to us is ego checks. So one of the most common and consistent barriers we've seen to sharing leadership work is ego. So we're not saying that you have to get rid of the ego and that you can't have an ego. We know that having an ego supports and protects us is part of who we are. But another part of this work is it's important to recognize when your ego might be getting in the way of sharing power and might be making it hard for you to make space for others, or where you're failing to take space to lead. And so being mindful of where you are and what you're doing is an important part of sharing leadership. And so practices at LLC that have been useful to us is coaching. So individual coaching and partner coaching has been a resource that has been just invaluable to us. Regular reflection, individual and collective reflection, journaling, and also general sort of self-awareness practices that help you to know yourself better. So you can be aware of like how your ego is showing up in this leadership relationship. And I've said the word relationship over and over again because sharing leadership is a relationship. So, you know, with me and Nikki, you know, you find yourself calling or thinking about your co-ED and you call them by your life partner's name. That's because this is a really deep relationship. And so tending to relationships is a critical part of sharing power, distributing leadership. And so, you know, effective leadership sharing requires us to be in a healthy relationship with each other. And as you shift power structures, you shift the nature of the relationship that you're in. So the ways and manner of nurturing that relationship may also begin to shift. And so for us, a practice or a set of practices that have been useful to us are building relationship and trust building into the workflow and into work planning, and not just treat it as a little extra thing that you tack on. And lastly, I've used the word power. And so for us, moving toward intentional action in relationship to power is a critical part of the distributed leadership model. So when we're talking about collective leadership, collaborative leadership, distributed leadership, these are all very much conversations about power. And so you need to be intentional about and aware of how you yield power, how you take power, and how you share power with others, often in new ways. And so in this, we think that, you know, moving towards shared, distributed, and networked leadership model supports the ability to build your collective leadership muscle. And if you determine that this is a desired outcome, then we really recommend that you assess how your organization structures, your policies, your traditions align with your shared leadership goals. So those are 4 ways that at LLC, we have been practicing sharing leadership. And, you know, there are more ways. Go to our website if you want to learn more. But those are 4 ways that we wanted to kick off the conversation. So we've been talking at you for a bit, and we want to give you an opportunity to talk as well. So we're going to put you in the breakout rooms. We'll be in breakout rooms for about 13 minutes or so. And we're going to invite you to talk with the other folks in your group about your experiences, thoughts, imaginings, musings about collective leadership. So in your room, there'll be 3 to 4 folks in your room, as I said, for about 13 minutes. We're going to invite you to introduce yourself, to explore how collective leadership shows up for you in the spaces that you hold or are in. We want to hear about how you are sharing or distributing leadership in your work or world. And we want to hear about what are the questions that are coming up for you about collective leadership. So I think the questions were put in the chat. So introduce yourself. How is collective leadership showing up for you? How are you practicing it? And what questions do you have? Does anyone have a question or a rebellion before we go into breakout rooms? No questions, no rebellions. We're going to work on this group. There's going to be a rebellion at one point before the end of these 5 coffee chats. But I hope to see you in a few minutes. Thank you.
All right. I know. I was mid-sentence too. How did you all do? You all fare okay? You want to share a little bit of what you heard in the group discussion, or if you wanted to finish a sentence so that your group could finally hear that, you know, we usually cut people off at the most remarkable, like, I'm going to tell you the secret to the, and then it's like, come back to here. So anybody else need to finish a sentence, perhaps? You good? If not, I would love to hear back some of what your discussions were about. Yeah, Elizabeth.
Hola, buenas tardes. Pues en el grupo en el que yo estaba con Ulsi y Silvia, fuimos completamente rebeldes y nos pasamos a la pregunta 4 sobre liderazgo colaborativo. En ese sentido, pues platicamos de algunas experiencias que se tienen en comunidad. Y bueno, hablamos sobre que hay ocasiones en que se tiene la iniciativa de dirigir alguna charla, alguna reunión, pero que las decisiones generalmente se hacen en consenso, en el diálogo colectivo, con la intención de generar confianza, de escuchar todas las voces, de ayudar a la participación, y era una forma de compartir el poder, donde todo el equipo sabe de todo lo que se trata el trabajo. Mencionaba por ahí que de alguna manera si alguien del equipo no está o falta, los demás tienen la habilidad de poder seguir con las actividades porque saben lo que se trata, saben sobre las decisiones y pueden continuarlo de alguna forma. Y pues terminamos, bueno, en lo último que estábamos era precisamente en la importancia de la generación de confianza en esta parte del trabajo y del liderazgo colectivo. No sé si alguien más de mi equipo quiera participar. Gracias.
Anyone else in Elizabeth's team want to layer on some more context to your conversation?
Alexandra nos dio un ejemplo muy bonito de cómo trabaja el LC, de cómo ustedes dividen este poder o distribuyen, mejor dicho, distribuyen el poder y la toma de decisiones, cosa que yo no había escuchado. Esto del piloto, los copilotos y los colaboradores, en su caso pilotas, copilotas y colaboradoras. Y suena que es algo que no solo es una cuestión meramente de manejo de equipos, o sea, sino también como de conscientemente, como lo dice Elizabeth, es una decisión consciente y consensuada de que el equipo o el trabajo recae en un equipo, aunque alguien, una persona o 2 personas sean quienes lideren ese equipo, que no necesariamente es lo mismo. Cambio.
Thanks for laying on. Anyone else want to add one more from Elizabeth and Lucia's group? Yes, Sylvia.
Sí, gracias. Comenta justamente que en cualquier equipo que haya, si es de trabajo, si es a nivel comunitario, si es con indígenas, si es con cualquier tipo de población objetivo que nos dirigimos, lo importante es entablar ese diálogo horizontal, en donde se oigan las voces de mujeres, de hombres, de ellos, ellas, ellas, en fin, de todos, para poder llegar a un consenso y poder decidir, si es que son reuniones para decidir, que sea una decisión colectiva, que sea una decisión compartida. Y para eso es muy importante esto que decía Liz, la confianza que uno debe de darle al grupo, al equipo, para que todo sea igual, entre iguales, ¿no? Ese diálogo entre iguales y no entablar jerarquías, sino que se oigan hacer participar a todos, motivar a a quien nos estamos dirigiendo para poder escuchar las voces de todos, de todas y de todos.
Thank you. That resonated a lot to me and kind of touched on some of the items of our the small breakout group I was able to join too. Anybody else want to share out from their small breakout room?
Our group got into sort of like nitty gritty, like how do you shed ego? What do you do when you're in a meeting and you're either as a facilitator or as a participant, and you see folks who are taking up more space than is reasonable, or not taking up more space, and like, so what does it mean to like ego check in practice? What does it mean to some of the things that we shared as practices that LLC tries on? What does it mean to do that, in practice? And so moving from theory to practice was where our conversation went.
So can we rebel a little bit and ask you to go deeper on what does that look like?
Rebellion is happening. I mean, and I'll just say that the reason why, like, I, really value, rebellion is because, someone earlier talked about the communication and engagement was consensual. And so a yes only matters if you can say no. And so the invitation to rebel is an invitation for you to actually consent and agree to be part of this. And so in terms of like the ego check practices that we talked about in the small group, is to just be grounded in reality and to name your observation. So if you're observing in someone else practices where they're taking up too much space, as a facilitator, something you could just name and say, I'm observing that we're not hearing from X, Y, or Z folks. Like, we're not hearing from the younger folks. We're not hearing from the older folks. We're not hearing from the back of the room. We're not hearing from the left side of the room. We're not hearing from X, Y, and Z. And so I use poor Marcel as the example. And so, like, as a facilitator, I might, if Marcel was going, as Marcel does, just going on and on and on, I might say, thank you, Marcel. Really appreciate, what you're contributing to this conversation. Just going to ask you to hold that thought for 1 minute, because I want to turn to Beth and make sure that we get this voice in the room. And then someone in the group asked, well, what if there's no facilitator? Because this is a fully collective, like, it's a fully flat space and there's no facilitator. And then I was saying, if there's no facilitator, then we're all facilitators. We're all responsible for creating the space. And therefore any of us can stand up and say, or sit up, or raise our hand or whatever, and say, I'm observing this is happening. And I'm not committed to the outcome. So I'm noting this observation. So if if no one else observes this, then I'm happy to sit back. But I just want to put on the table that I'm observing this and wanted to see what the group thinks about shifting in a different way, so that we might have a different outcome. And so just naming what you see is either as a participant or as a facilitator is a way to do some ego checking without the easily. So that's an example of a practice that we talked about. I see Beth has a hand up. Nikki, I'm turning it back to you.
Beth, please layer on.
Sure. So yeah, Erica really helped us kind of, from what I understood, like a question came out about ego and what do you do with ego? And one of the things I thought was really unique about what Erica shared with us was also when ego can be useful, when you're kind of dealing with some tough issues and you're kind of bring your whole space, yourself into a space. And then maybe there is a time for like that kind of conversation and then time for more of a, like what we're talking about now, where there's a little more listening potentially going on and sharing and collaborating on stuff. But maybe sometimes to be able to push something in a different direction if it's not really going equitably or as it should, if you see more potential, there's ways to do that with ego positively, which kind of struck me because at first I think, ego is that negative, but not necessarily, so that was really insightful for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Marcel, did you have something to add too?
No, I think you covered it very well, except I am the one who is being rebelled against. Thank you so much.
Awesome. We have time for one more share out. I'm curious if anybody else is interested in giving their reflections. Patty. Patty, I think you might still be on mute.
One of the things that I took from our group was we looked at what our common passions were. And we looked at, like mine was about climate change and global warming, and just different people, each of us had different ways of doing it with our family, with our neighborhoods, with our, international associations. It was quite wonderful to see that whole spectrum and so hopeful. I've been very kind of depressed about where we are as a nation and a democracy and about our capacity to deal with our future, with the climate future. And so I felt hope.
So appreciating that. I think with that, we're going to offer another breakout space with the same group so you can deepen the conversation. We have a few offerings of how that breakout, what you could continue talking about in that breakout space. Erica, I'm going to pass it on to you to share those questions.
So they're kind of derived from the earlier conversation. So one to see about, in your own work or life, how do you practice sharing power? What questions come up for you about sharing power? What else is emerging for you? And there should be a fourth question, which is about rebellion. So you don't want to, if you don't want to answer any of those questions, but there's something else you want to talk about, do it. So again, I'll say, how do you practice sharing power in work and life? What are questions that are coming up for you about sharing power? And what else is emerging for you? Is there a rebellion? And I mentioned work and life because we're sharing power all the time. And we have, places in which we have important relationships where we work, where we play, where we pray, in our communities. So thinking about all the ways in which you exercise leadership, those are all the ways in which we would like you to think about those questions. Okay. Thank you.
Let's see. Yeah. What about leaving it at the front? Okay, just leave it by the door.
I know someone was mid-sentence as in our group and on kind of a hard sentence as well. So I want to thank you for your patience with with Zoom and our coming back from the small groups. But I really enjoyed the conversation that I had with my small group. It got real intimate real fast. And appreciating the vulnerability of my group mates and being in that space. I'm wondering if anyone from any group wants to share back anything from their small group.
If I might, just to give some feedback, we discussed the ego issue in the room and how we deal with ego. I gave some scenarios in my life of how I've been having to deal with ego in the rooms. And what I indicated is there's no place for ego in any room, in any discussion. And it really relates to how do you communicate with each other in the room to be able to accomplish the task of what you want to achieve. Because everyone has a voice and everyone can make a difference. I mentioned as we have been talking about collective leadership, I believe that is absolutely important. But I also know that if there's no leader, then there's people running around like chickens with their head cut off. So someone has to lead, someone has to give direction. And in doing that, instead of what I do, and I don't ask if we have consensus, we ask, are we in agreement? And we use agreement versus collective versus consensus, because you'll never get consensus. Everybody has their own agenda. Everyone's thinking. Some people are thinking about going home. Some people are thinking about the next meeting. Some people are on the phone waiting for their wife to call. So there's all kind of things going through people's heads. Some of them may not have been even really paying attention to the conversation, but they're in the room. And if you wait for that discussion, it sometimes slows up the agenda. So that was the key. And I mentioned, for me at least, leadership is about power, and the power comes from those who are around you. So one of my philosophies in my work is I never go into a room and be the first one to sit down, especially if I'm not the person calling the meeting. I allow them to give me a place to sit, and they will give me a left or a right, and they'll offer a seat to me. And once they have that seat, I assume that seat, because the way you sit in the room is critical to your power. If you sit at one end of the room, then people believe you're in charge. If you're sitting at two ends of the table, you're at one end, they're at the other. There's a power thing that goes on in the room, right at the chairs. So I normally will not sit at the head of the table unless they offer me the head of the table. And then I still defer to people before I even speak. I ask others to speak so that I am not considered the power, because I don't know the agenda of the person that I'm sitting at the other end. And if they're a foe, or if they have a personal agenda, they then look at me as the power. And that may deter me from accomplishing my goals, versus me humbling myself and, not speaking. So those are my thoughts. That's what we talked about. I don't know, Rebecca and Nikki might have heard something different. So I could offer either of them to give me some other feedback, but I thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Just a couple more things that Curtis said that I want to elevate in our group was going back to power, because, obviously I was still stuck on the ego question. And so I was like, those of us who are extroverts, we don't tend to have a problem helping other people see when their ego is checking, but it's more of like, when do I need to check my own ego? And so some of Curtis's comments were around how do we control and negotiate our own power in a space? So some of it was related to where you sit in the room, but also, when do you really need to activate humility, which is 99.9% of the time? And then also the homework that you need to do before you go into a space. So understanding what is the common goal that we're looking towards, where might be those pain points, and how do I negotiate my power in those spaces? Again, humbling myself to really help us meet that common goal. So it might be to stand up, it might be to sit down, it might be to speak up, it might be to do more listening. But the more I have an understanding of what the dynamics in that space are and what the common goal is and how I can use my homework and humility to get there, that is another way in which we can achieve collective leadership without me taking the charge and running full force ahead. So that's something that I gathered from our conversation. And Nikki, if there's anything else you want to take.
I'll say that I think I see that language might be something to define. I saw that in the chat as well. That situation you're in is something to pay attention to too. Like some folks are in an urgent situation and you need to accomplish something in a quick amount of time. So you have to have certain awarenesses, be ready for that negotiation, right? And then some of us are in spaces that have a longer arc or maybe can give you room to slow down for purpose, right? And so you're looking not just for a transactional like goal, but you're actually looking for a long-term commitment and goal together. So there may be ways for us to assess the landscape of the situation we're into. Pass it back to you, Erica.
Thank you. I love that. Is there anyone else who would like to share back from their small group? And one other thing you mentioned language. I saw in the chat there was a conversation about consensus. And so there's different kind of decision making models, and so like some folks use consent-based decision making, which differs a little bit from consensus, but there are other ways of collectively sharing the decision making process that work. Anyone else want to?
Look like Ines wanted to share group experience there.
Hi, yes, hello, good evening. Yes, oh, first of all, I do apologize because I was in a wrong group. I was not in my previous group, but fortunately I met my Spanish fellows. So even though I'm a Portuguese speaker, but we understand one another. Yes, first of all, let me share that collective power is something that we can say that in theory can happen, in theory, because we are talking about different people, but even that situation it's possible to reach a point where everybody can be part, can feel that they are part, or they can feel that they have that power. And it depends who is leading and what are our purpose on a specific task that we have. But we agreed that a collective power is about giving everyone responsibility. So each member shall have a responsibility. So if anything happens, all are responsible for that, whether it is a setback or it is a success. But the most important is that we are giving voice to people. So people can say, oh, okay, I shared, my idea was that, yeah. So in terms of control, how do we control it? Again, it's something difficult, but we have what we call the monitoring process. And if you are a leader, you are able to see if everybody are part of that specific task or that specific activity. So that's what I can say so far regarding what we discuss in our group.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate bringing up the relationship between power and responsibility. Like everybody wants power, and responsibility not much. So
yes.
Thank you for bringing those two together.
You're welcome.
To Nikki to close us out. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. There are so many good nuggets in here, and I feel like you all might have some learnings and takeaways. So I have an invitation if you want to. If you have some learnings you want us to memorialize, I'm going to drop my email. And you can email me your learnings, and I'll make sure to memorialize it into the slide deck, and I'll put it at the bottom of the slide deck. And we will make sure we add it so people can hear your great tips and learnings too. But I just wanted to pull out some of the things I heard already, which is we got to set ourselves our intentions, right? So we got to go, if it's about collective leadership that we're talking about here and we want to activate that, we got to also activate humility. We have to have an awareness of our ego, right? Sometimes you got to put that aside if you know that you have a certain ego. We have to have that discussion within ourselves about power and responsibility and how you want to show up. We want to make sure we do some homework to understand the lay of the land. A lot of people think collective leadership is devoid of leadership, right? That means everybody has leader, means nobody has leadership, right? what I'm actually hearing is there actually is a lot of roles to play and a lot of people, you know, ways to arrange people. So somebody, if your skill is an arranger, then you gotta start arranging people. You gotta know who's in the room. You gotta organize, you know, and see who's you know, can do what in this kind of space. I also heard a lot about collective power is about giving everybody responsibility, and there was about a comment about horizontal communication too. So gotta make sure that you're building some agreements, maybe towards some consent, maybe even through line to some like consensus on values or shared goals or something, right, to bring folks along. So there's actually a lot of work and a lot of roles and a lot of opportunities in collective leadership. But I want to leave you with this notion that start the conversation. This is not an intuitive thing. Everybody comes in, as you probably noticed in this conversation, with a different definition of what this thing is. So start the conversation. And I'm going to bring us back to what Xiomara said, for us, the real like anchoring of this conversation about collective leadership is because there's just so many of us now, so many generations of us. We got to bring people together, and we cannot do this alone, right? As more and more folks are here and inheriting some of the problems of the past, right? Then we all need to be activated to solutions forward. So we have 5 minutes left. I'm going to invite you in the chat if you'd like to just say, you know, in whatever language you prefer, just your gratitudes for anybody that might have said something today that you're like, oh, thank you. Like Curtis, you gave us a gift of a phrase. So I want to thank you for it. I heard what you said, right? When you're talking with a bunch of people and lots of different people, instead of just moving over here and there and making people get into consensus right away, you can just stop with a period by saying, I heard what you said. Hey, Erica, what would you like to say? Okay. In the chat, please put down a gratitude you have for if somebody said something in the room that really gave you a thank you. That gave me a little bit of something new today. Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Marcel. We'll do our best to get this translated too afterwards. Wonderful. I'm going to read some of them out while you do it. Thank you, Erica and Beth, for giving tangible examples of ego checking. I heard a call for ego check toolkit. Let's see how much information we have. We'll put something together. Decision making versus idea sharing. Oftentimes it's not clear what we're doing, and at least frustrations, having that clear purpose. Alex, would you be open to reading some of the Spanish comments with me too?
Yes. Can I read them in Spanish though? Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. My God, don't put me to translate. Para Elizabeth, gracias por traer a la discusión siempre el trabajo conjunto entre la academia y las comunidades. Yo, para Elizabeth y Silvia, por compartir sus experiencias con diferentes comunidades. Elizabeth, para María, gracias por ser concise y en pocas palabras expresar ideas complejas. Y agradezco a María la palabra que utilizó, que fue escuchar a Inés sobre la responsabilidad.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your day, night, evening, wherever you might be coming from. Stay well.
Okay, thank
Marcel,
you.
did you have some closing words too?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. Really wanted to thank you so much for for joining today's conversation. Like I was gonna ask something similar, but thank you for also asking everybody to just put something in the chat today. But join me really to thank Nikki and Erica for leading this conversation. Applause, anything you want, emojis. Thank you so much for this conversation. For some of you who were here last time, I think this is a continuation, actually, when you talk about intergeneration and going into collective leadership. It's a continuation, and I'm happy to see some of the familiar faces. I really hope that you can also make it to the next one. We hope that you'll find these conversations in the main room and breakout rooms were engaging, but also learning experience as well. We hope also you are able to connect with folks, because that's what we want to do. We really want to make sure that you connect, you see each other eye to eye, and just, maybe do something together. We encourage that, and we're here to support some of the collaboration work that you have with each other, so that we can support the families and children and communities that we all serve. So have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Some of you are really late. Have a wonderful evening, and we hope to see each other next week.
That's true. Okay. Bye.
Bye now.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Ines.